Happy Chanukah, everyone. Both here, cyberspace, all over the world, as we bring light into the world to dispel darkness. As I've discussed many, many times, when it comes to light and darkness, it's an interesting phenomenon as opposed to water and fire, which are equal adversarial forces. They're equal adversaries, which means enough water can extinguish large bodies of large fires, and enough fire can extinguish large bodies of water. When it comes to light and darkness, there's no battle. A little light dispels much darkness, which essentially means that even if you have the darkest room, you bring a little light. It doesn't need to go to war. It naturally will dispel any darkness. Obviously, if it's a lot of darkness, you need more light, but there's no battle going on, which is a tremendous lesson, psychological lesson in life, that King Solomon compares light and darkness to wisdom and folly, which is the wisdom of the soul, the wisdom of spiritual values can dispel automatically the folly of selfish impulses. You just need to bring it into the picture. Most of our mistakes happen because we don't reflect, and we just allow we allow our impulses to take over. But if you just reflect, there's no match between a fool and a wise one. A wise person will always dominate over a fool. But we have to allow the wise voice to speak up. So that Happy Chanukah, Festival of Lights, we'll be talking about Dreidel, 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 like the name of the song, the Kabbalistic meaning of the Chanukah Dreidel. Now Dreidel is a Yiddish word which means either spin or the spinner or spinning. It means to drei, to spin. So the first thing comes into, and it's a custom that goes back, it's a little shrouded in somewhat of unknown sources. How far back does it go? This game that children and some adults play on Chanukah, which is really spinning. It's like a top, but it's a four-sided square top that spins and has four different Hebrew letters in each one of the four sides, which are Gimel, Nun, Shin, Hey, or Hey Shin, which some say is an acronym for Nes Gadol, Nun Gimel, Nes Gadol, great miracle happened there. In Israel, some people replace the sham with a pei, which means happened here, because the miracle happened, of course, in Jerusalem. And there are other different acronyms, I'll talk about them as well. So whether this custom goes back, who knows how long, whether it's something that just became something of just a recent phenomenon. But bottom line is, it's become part of Chanukah literature, part of Chanukah not liturgy, but customs. So everything is divine providence. So questions came in to talk about it, so I'll talk about it in the context, obviously, of the holiday and the festival. And of course, beginning, of course, with the general, as soon as you hear something spinning, the first knee-jerk reaction is what? Do you feel like your life is spinning out of control? How you like that? Some people feel their life is spinning out of control. On the other hand, would you prefer life where there's no spinning at all? As I've always pointed out, a non-spinning life can be quite destructive. And the classic story I've shared many times with the cardiologist who had a very difficult life, comes to the classes once in a while here. And he's a very sweet guy, and he once says to me, I wish I had just one day of peace in my life. Maybe you can intervene with God to just one day of peace, complete peace. So I said, what do you mean, like a straight line? He said, no, not a flat line. Because as we know, a cardiogram, which reflects the rhythm of the heart, is all about waves. A flat line is a sign of death. So we don't want to have no spinning going on. We just want to have spinning with balance. That's how I would put it. So spinning out of control is one extreme, and the complete paralysis is the other extreme. But life is synonymous with movement, the pulsating heart, the beating heart, the rhythm of breath. Wherever you look, life is about mobility, about movement. That's the natural human being, is a moving entity. And I don't just mean physically moving, also psychologically moving. We need stimulation. We need to grow. We are constantly in a state where we're looking to certain restlessness that we have naturally in our beings, in our psyches. So when you think of the term spinning, you can have spinning out of control, you can have spinning with balance. So of course the big question is, how do we find that balance? How do we find balance in an erratic life? Can we learn to navigate through the chaos? And of course, in the context of Chanukah, can we find light amidst darkness and confusion? That's the theme that we'll be talking about. Don't they always say to shut phones, right? In a class. So those are the questions, and fundamental questions, and very much connected to the central theme of Chanukah, as I've always talked about and spoken about. That Chanukah, like all Jewish holidays, has a universal message, and a profound universal message that actually teaches us about our inner psyches, our inner souls, and gives us tools and skills with which we can learn to navigate our lives. And of course, Chanukah's central theme, light and dark, is such a central theme in life. Night and day, light and dark. When people say I'm in the dark, confusion is compared to darkness, clarity is compared to light. It's a fundamental theme, however you turn and twist it. And what does Chanukah teach us? That, as I said at the outset, a little light can dispel much darkness, and dispels it naturally and automatically, which is the immediate lesson to all of us, is exactly the story of Chanukah several thousand years ago. What happened was that the Greco-Syrians defiled the temple and defiled the pure olive oil with which they lit the menorah. And as a result, when they finally won the battle and were able to rededicate the temple, they did not find any pure olive oil. This is the story of Chanukah. Until they found one crucible, one little flask of pure olive oil that was untouched. And even though it was only enough to burn for one night, the miracle was it burned for 8 nights until they were able to manufacture new pure olive oil. As a result, the next year, they dedicated, as the sages dedicated, that we should from here on commemorate this miracle with lighting a menorah of 8 flames, remembering the miracle of 8 days. And that became the Chanukah, mitzvah of Chanukah, to remember the lighting of the flames. There's a lot of obvious questions that jump, that are glaring and jump right at you when you read the story. First of all, let's start with it. Was the miracle, was this not incidental? The rededication of the temple and the burning of the lighting of the menorah. It seems that the real miracle was that the many were vanquished by the few, that the few Maccabees were able to win a war over the many, because that set in motion everything else. And we mention it in the prayers, but we don't really commemorate that at all. Why are we commemorating a detail, which is it's an important detail, but why are we commemorating, why is it all symbolized? My Chanukah, the Talmud says, it's all about the lighting of the flames. And that's number one. Number two, it's interesting, the menorah in the temple was kindled and burned all day and all night. They're tamid. It was kindled mostly in the morning. And here we light the menorah, Chanukah, in the evening. The menorah in the temple was lit indoors. It was inside the holy section of the temple. Chanukah is on Pesach Beisim Machutz, we light it at the door facing outward. Either the windows or the door facing outward, outside the door. So, and then of course the menorah in the temple was 7 lights, not 8. So in every possible way, there's questions, what really is Chanukah? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, has a very powerful piece, which, to understand that, let me preface another thing. We also find that in Jewish tradition, you find that the menorah and light plays a very prominent role. The menorah in the temple stood out among all the other vessels and activities in the temple. There's this chapter after when the temple is described when it's being built. The menorah has its own chapter. In Bahal Leischa, we have about the chapter of kindling the menorah. We of course have in Jewish tradition, we have the lighting of the Shabbos candles, of holiday candles. Even, God forbid, when someone passes, the Yizkor candle, the memorial candle flame. So what is it about flames that are so fundamental? So the answer is because a flame is the closest approximation to what a soul looks like. The flame of God is the soul of a human being. Ner Hashem nishmat adam. Why? When you look at a flame, you see a bunch of things. First of all, you see it defies gravity. It's the only physical thing that defies gravity. Our souls defy gravity. They aspire, they yearn, they search, they look upward, they look for transcendence. A flame is restless, as the human spirit is restless, as I mentioned before. We're mobile. A flame is spinning, so to speak. It's flickering. Flame warms its environment. It illuminates its environment. You light another flame, the first flame does not get diminished. So there's literally tens and hundreds of messages that the flame carries for us, which is why the previous Chabad Rebbe said once that we have to listen to the story that the flames tell us. It's a beautiful poetic expression, but it's like the flames tell us a story. So when we light Chanukah menorah, look at the flames and it tells you your story. Your story, the story of a soul's search and seeking for transcendence, like a flame reaches upward, does not allow itself to be dragged down by the mundane routines of physical life, which means the gravitational pull of money, of honor, of temptations, of all the other things that keep us grounded. Flame is always licking the air, looking to go upward, as is the flame of the human being soul, seeking transcendence. So Chanukah there, in that sense, captures the essence of what a human life is about. And with that, we'll understand what makes it unique, as opposed to the menorah, answer the questions I asked before. That includes the fact that we light it in the evening because it's one thing to light light, to bring light into the world. But the real story of Chanukah was that even after the light was extinguished, and there was no pure olive oil, and pure olive oil is critical here, not just olive oil, pure, untouched, not defiled by man and by people with bad intentions. That's the purity, that really keeps the soul pure. That means that's a lesson to all of us that we should always remain, that at least your soul, the things that you spiritually aspire to, don't let it get contaminated. And then it has that ability to rise upward. So when do we light the menorah? Not just regular, we light it in the evening and at the door. All to symbolize that it's here that light is stronger than darkness, which is the lesson, of course, in all of life, the hope and confidence that we all have to have, and trust, no matter what you've gone through in your life, no matter what darkness you've gone through, light is always more powerful than darkness, period. That, in a nutshell, is the essential story of Chanukah. That's why we light it at the night, and we light it at the door, facing outward, and we do everything possible to show that power of light over darkness, the light dispelling darkness. And that's why we also light 8 flames and not 7. 7 is the cycle of life, 7 days of the week, the 7 emotional spheres, the cycle of 7. 8 is the element of transcendence. You don't just have light in the cycle, but you have the 8th day of transcendence that you can go beyond structure. You can go beyond structure and therefore even pierce the barrier between light and dark. So in a regular structure, you have day and night, 7 days a week. There's no 8th day of the week, but there's the 8th day of Chanukah, so it introduces a light that pierces the darkness. Whereas every day, there's half of the day is day, or whatever the amount of hours, then the sun sets and nightfall enters. Here, Chanukah tells us that we can get to a place that can transcend the night and illuminate it with the Chanukah flames. Going back to Nachmanides that I quoted before, that I didn't quote, but I was going to quote, he says a fascinating thing, that the flames in the temple, they ultimately were extinguished with the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians and later by the Romans. And however, these flames, Haneres Halolu, the ones that we light on Chanukah, will never be extinguished. And indeed, we've been lighting them for every year with an unbroken chain, year after year, since even after the destruction of the temple. Telling you that the Chanukah lights in some ways even more powerful than the temple menorah. The menorah of 8, the candelabra of 8 is more powerful than that of 7. And that's why even in the darkest times, and there's even stories in the Holocaust, where the Jews sacrificed their lives to be able to light a flame. So in our day, we have a continuing lighting of flames even through the dark years of exile till this very day in an unbroken chain. So that is the general story of Chanukah and story of the pure oil and all the different questions I had asked. The things I've just mentioned are things I've spoken about many different times. I want to now get it connected to this custom called the dreidel. Again, whether the custom has basis or not is not so clear, but it's definitely in the lexicon. And everything is divine providence, so I'm sure we can glean some lessons in this context. There are a few good sources. There's a book called Bnei Yisachar, where he discusses the dreidel, and he says that the 4 letters, Gimel, Shin, Nun, Hey, which is, as I said, the Gimel, the Shin, Nun, Hey, also make up the word Geshna, Goshen. Goshen was a city in Egypt that which we will be reading about next week. It's a city that is when after Joseph reconciles with his brothers, next week's chapter, and after 22 years of being separated from his father and from them, he then invites them, because it was the great famine that consumed the region. So Joseph invites, he says, bring my father and bring all of you, and I'll give you the best of the land, the best of the land of Egypt. And Egypt was a rich country, especially then as a superpower, and was the one that was selling all the grain to everyone. I will give you the best of the land, which is Geshna, which is this land called Goshen. But it's written Gimel, Shin, Nun, Hey, the same 4 letters that are on the Menorah, that are on the dreidel, which I said before was an acronym for Ganez Gadol Hayasham. Some say it's also 4 Yiddish words, which is that when you spin the dreidel and you play a game, whether it's an exchange of nuts or whatever it is that they play as part of the game, that the Gimel means Gib, which means that you take the whole pot. Shin means that you what's the shin represent in Yiddish? I forgot. I have to remember myself. Hey is halb, meaning you get half the pot. Nun means nothing, neutral. It's like as of nothing. And then the shin means you have to give into the pot, which shin means shik maybe. I don't remember the Yiddish words. But regardless, going back to Geshna, what is Geshna? Geshna is interesting. It's the best of the land of Egypt. But Egypt was considered the depravity of the land, Erves Haaretz. And yet we're told that when Jacob came to Egypt, where did he live? He lived there, and it says that he lived there 17 years. 17 is the same numerical equivalent of good, because those are the best his years. His best years were the last 17 years of all places in Egypt, not in Israel. So the question is asked, how could that be? That after all the suffering he went through, where was his best years in Egypt, which was not considered the place? Mitzrayim, the name for Hebrew, means constraints. It would become the place of so much oppression for the Jewish people. But it was because it was giving power to transform darkness. So essentially it's the same theme of Chanukah, that in the darkness you bring tremendous amount of light, which is hinted to in this best of the land, where Jacob and his family built, until of course afterwards when they passed away and their next generation were taken into slavery. But it demonstrates that even going in this darkest of place, it was given the power to transform even the darkest thing. This he does not say the Bnei Yisachar. He just speaks about Geshen, and he speaks about it also in context of 4 different types of exiles, which is what I'm going to elaborate now upon. Because the question, of course, then is, fine, so we're talking about bringing light into a dark place, but how do you do it? And how do you do it in a way that is balanced, as I said? Because when things are going, you could say a healthy life, things are going smoothly, you could say, fine, I'm able to manage. But we all know life is not a smooth journey. It has its bumps. It has its twists and turns. And it spins. Like a dreidel, it spins. And when it spins, as I said before, it can spin out of control to the point where we're overwhelmed, where we don't even know what to do the next day. So many things happening, overwhelming us. Different directions, being bombarded, inundated by so many different forces. That's called spinning. Spinning. On the other hand, we don't want to not spin at all. We don't want it to stop, because life is momentum, life is movement, and you want to grow. But when we have these blocks and these impediments and these fears and these inhibitions, so the question is, how do we find balance? How do we find a balance and a way to navigate through the storms? Through the good times, obviously, is easy, but through the stormy times, through the darker times. So it's good to say that Chanukah provides us with a lesson of light. But in that lesson itself, there's actually 4 steps, which are hinted to in these 4 letters. So another way of explaining these 4 letters is that they represent four different, they're acronym for another thing called, in Hebrew, body, that's the gimel, guf. Okay, shin is an acronym for the word seichel, intelligence. The nun is an acronym for the word nefesh, soul or neshama, soul, nefesh. And the hey is an acronym for the word hakoil, everything. So essentially, as he explains that these are the four different type of exiles, the four different type of displacements. I'm going to discuss this a little more, elaborate on this, that there's really four different ways where we can, that are necessary for us, four steps, I would say, four skills that we need to master to be able to navigate in a difficult, chaotic, dark world. And they are hinted to in these four letters. Geishna, which means the goal is to find the best of the land, that even in the Mitzrayim of our lives, even when we are in a state of constraints, a state of inhibitions and limitations and borders and all the things that keep us limited and impediments in our lives, yet at the same time, we're able to find the best of that and create an oasis called Geishna, made up of four different letters. So what are the four things, as I said? Body, soul, intelligence, and hakol, which could be either all, or you could say hechel, which would be a corridor. Hechel would be like a hall, but let's do it hakol. That's, I think he says hakol, which has all of them. So there's both a positive and end. We all are made up of a body and a soul, which, as it says in the Tanya, are like the two souls that we have, the animal soul and the divine soul. So the animal soul is interested in bodily matters. So there's our body life, which is the life of our bodies. The life of our bodies, the gimel, the guf, is the life of materialism. Eating, sleeping, drinking, sleeping, providing, living and functioning and surviving in this material world. Now, there's a positive side to that, and there's a negative side to that. The positive side to that is that living in this world, we ask, and the Torah tells us we're blessed with health, with livelihood, parnasa, with all the requirements to live and function healthily in this world. So we should be able to fulfill our higher mission. Okay. What's the negative side is that we can become overconsumed with our bodies and worship our bodies and forget our purpose in life. This is people who are overindulgent, in a disproportionate way, worship money, worship power, worship influence, worship materialism. So the guf itself, the gimel, is a good thing, but it has to be in balance. There's a negative way, there's a positive way. Let's not talk about the next, the nun. The nun is nefesh or neshama, soul. So also we have our spiritual lives. As I mentioned before, this is the transcendental part, the flame that rises upward. The flame that rises upward, that's the transcendence. Now here too there can be a balance and imbalance. The balance is when you have a good balance where your feet are firmly planted on the ground, your body is intact, you have a healthy body, but you also have a healthy soul. They work hand in hand. Where could it get imbalanced is when a person becomes too spiritual and they neglect and they forget their material lives. A certain form of asceticism or a form of isolating themselves and becoming not grounded in the language of the Kabbalists, that you don't have the energies in the containers, where you have too much of a spiritual life and that spirituality is divorced of and somewhat not able to be integrated into our material lives. So that's number two. Then comes a third soul, which is not talked about in Tanya, but talked about elsewhere. It's called the nefesh hasichlis. This is the intelligent soul. This is not necessarily the soul. This is a more neutral type of soul. What do I mean by neutral? It's not neutral, but it's neutral in the sense because it is intelligence. Intelligence is meant to be an objective arbiter, an objective moderator of different choices. So the divine is very clearly subjectively driven towards transcendence and toward the divine, meaning the purpose of life. The bodily soul, the guf, the gimel, is definitely directed and driven toward the impulsive need materialism. The seichel, which is the shin, is the force that is the intelligence of the human being to intelligently train yourself, intelligently tell yourself that it is divine, that it is the divine soul you should be aspiring to, not the animal soul. Now, why do you need this third? Because you need something that is in between that can talk sense into us, and can become a way of a bridge between the divine and the body and the material and the matter. So the shin is like a balancer between matter and spirit, basically. But the shin also has two sides to it, which means it can be over. It also needs a balance. For example, people can live in their heads, and their minds become an enemy. Their minds become a way of a smokescreen of excuses or rationalization of a person's behavior, where the mind suddenly becomes a tool to just avoid life instead of engaging in life. So then there's the healthy mind. The healthy mind is being a truly objective observer and objective, I would say, processor that analyzes and processes data and gives you back the best possible result. And then we have the hakel. What he says there, is referring to something that has all of the above. Meaning it either attacks all of the above in a negative way, where the intelligence is skewed, the soul is imbalanced, and the body is imbalanced, or it creates a full integration of all of them, that you have a full healthy body, soul, and mind. So sometimes we say today they say in medicine there's the soul, there's the body, soul, mind type of healing. Bill Moyer has made a big thing about it, has a big famous book years ago on PBS, was a whole show, I think it was Body, Mind, Soul, I think it was called, where it wasn't just the body and the mind, but also the soul, the spiritual side of a person. So the hakel would be the full balanced picture where you have hey, everything is in a balanced way. And of course, it can be an imbalanced way. So when you're dealing with the light of Chanukah, you're dealing with trying to navigate the stormy oceans, the stormy seas of life. It's critical to have very strong navigational equipment, instruments, I should say. And those instruments are about really creating a situation where you are, you're able to navigate not just the ups and downs, but also balance them all in a way where it's totally integrated. So you have to really, a great way of doing this is really almost like creating 4 lists, I'd say 3 lists and then the 4th list. And that is, where do we stand in our relationship with our bodies and with our material lives? The next column, the next sheet would be, the next list would be, where do you stand in your spiritual and transcendental life? The third would be, where's your intelligence and your mind being used? Where is it invested in? And then we'll deal with the 4th one last, which is, of course, the mix of them all. So starting with the body, it comes down to this. Look, we wake up in the morning, we get out of bed, we're immediately focusing on our bodily needs, which is either grooming ourselves, cleaning ourselves, exercising, whatever it is, feeding ourselves. So your body is definitely being fed. So you want to make sure that the hygiene of the body is a healthy hygiene, healthy balance, right diet, the right exercise, and so on. You want to make sure that you're a healthy person. You want to make sure that you have a reliable income, that you have the security needed to be able to create the platform for which you can build upon and reach your greater spiritual needs. So this is an important thing to come to terms of knowing that you should not be overindulging in your body and your material life, but not underindulging either. To have a balanced and a healthy balance of that material life. It comes to the spiritual side. This is where most people are going to fall pretty short pretty quickly, is what are you doing for your soul on a daily basis? We know what we're doing for our body. Everybody eats and drinks every day. Everybody, I don't know if they exercise, but they do some things that are for the body. The body is a very prominent feature, and we don't need to do a lot of work because the body tells you, reminds you. We sleep. We get tired. The body needs rest. We nap. Different things that our bodily needs require. But when it comes to the soul, you start making the list. You'll say, okay, what have I done for my soul today? Many people say, what am I supposed to do for my soul? We don't even know what to do. Remember, a soul cannot be fed with physical food. It needs spiritual food. So what is the spiritual nourishment of a soul? It really breaks into 3 categories. Divine wisdom, spiritual way of thinking, spiritual a spiritual philosophical philosophy. Number 2, prayer, which is an emotional connection to the soul, emotional expression of the soul, love, praying to God, developing, meditating. And 3, actions, spiritual actions, which is charity, kindness, virtue, all the values. Now these are not body, even though you may be doing it with your body, but they're not driven by the body. They're driven by giving. They're driven by a spiritual need. And that's how we nourish the soul. So in the second column, we should be analyzing and evaluating where do we stand in the nun, in the neshama or the nefesh areas. Then comes the third category. The third column is really asking questions about our minds. Where is your mind? So I remember having a conversation with somebody, very intelligent guy, who was having a lot of problems in relationships, his personal life, but a really smart guy. So I asked him this question. I said to him, tell me, if you were to estimate, where do you invest your mind, your great mind, most of the time during the day? And he says, I'm embarrassed to tell you. So I said, tell me anyway. He said to me, some favorite video games that he plays. So I said, how much of your mind do you really need for that? He says, it doesn't matter how much of mine, but that's where I spend my time. So I say, you're taking your great mind, instead of trying to understand deeper things, you're just focusing. He says, yeah, that's how I get by. It's a great way of escape. And it keeps me numb, basically. This is the example of not using your mind the way you should be using it. Now, there are other people who use their mind in very devious ways to continuously look for, looking at either getting their way, manipulating, outmaneuvering others, vengeance. People use their minds to all kinds of plotting and conspiring to just maneuver, so-called, due to their insecurities, they use their minds to figure out how to maneuver their lives. And of course, the healthy way to lose your mind is that your mind is a great tool to open you up to new possibilities. The emotions of a person are much more fearful, much more hesitant. The mind can dream. The heart doesn't really dream. The heart pines, it aspires. But the mind can fantasize, it can imagine, it can dream of all kinds of possibilities. So great mind really opens you up to looking at a bigger picture. And then bringing that back to the person and saying, isn't that an exciting thing to do? And trying to get them to lift to another place. So the mind becomes actually a tool of transcendence if you really choose to do so. But this is why the mind is not either the soul nor the body, because it can go both ways. The mind can be used also to figure out, like some people sit and spend hours and hours online to figure out where they're going to eat tonight and which restaurant they're going to eat. And that also needs research. Or, as I said, the mind can be used for nonsense. There's some people who know every baseball statistic of the last 100 years. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the worst thing on earth, but I don't know how much earth-shattering changes are made because they know it's baseball statistics. So a mind is a very powerful tool we all have, and the challenge is, how do we use this mind? And this is something we need to evaluate. And that's the third side of the dreidel. And all of them, as you notice, are all part of the spin of life, because when you do them correctly, the spin will not be out of control, it will be a healthy spin. If, for example, a person is too involved in materialism and too little spirituality, rest assured you're going to have a lot of anxiety and a lot of dissonance, and therefore a life that can easily spin out of control. On the other hand, if you have too much spirituality and too little material, the person, for example, they are so spiritual that they can drive themselves sick. I know people who fasted, their soul becomes so refined that they lose sight of reality. They need to be grounded in this world. Asceticism is not an approach except for exceptional cases, but even then, today, for sure not. So in other words, you can't just have a soul without a body. You can't just be so, look what happened to some of the greatest geniuses of our generation. They blew their brains out in their aspirations with drugs or whatever it may be. So soul needs grounding. And that too spins out of control, where a person's so they're so desperate for transcendence that they just keep driving themselves to the point of self-destruction. Okay, then comes the intelligence. The intelligence is the arbiter, as I said. It's like the word I want to use. The referee. The referee. The referee that looks at everything in your life and is able to give you an objective perspective that, you know what, you're being too materialistic, you're being too spiritual. You need the balance. You can't just go too high, you can't go too low. You need to have that, as I said, the rhythm, the wave. So the intelligence, which is the seichel, the shin, gives us the ability to, is the referee that looks at things and steps back and says, let me look at what's going on in my life. Let me analyze this. Let me get an objective opinion. So that's where you have those three are critical components. And the hey is when all three are working and all of them are working in a proper way. And then the spin is the right spin. You see when you spin a dreidel, it spins, but at some point it stops spinning because it's the right balance. There are times when you have to move forward, there are times you need to rest, and there's that cycle of life, the rhythm of life. Good examples are nature. We see the seasons. Look at the seasonal changes. They're constantly going through changes. We're now entering winter, as everyone's reminded now here. Winter is not a bad time. Winter is a time when some things go to sleep. The seasons, the trees go to sleep. They go into a certain hibernation to gather resources, to protect themselves, to regenerate. So some of them like sleep, like we sleep. Then they will come to springs. The spring will break the winter, which will be, things will begin to blossom slowly, coming out of the slumber, like you could say dawn, the dawn of the seasons, which will turn into summer, which is the full-blown warm season where people can really expand, like we could say midday. So if winter is night, spring is dawn, summer is midday, and then will come fall. As the dusk falls, the sun will set, and we'll go back into, the leaves will fall of the trees, preparing to go back into that cycle, into the sleep of the seasons. So the seasons are a perfect example of four stages. Four stages. I can't say that I could associate those four with the four I'm talking about, but meaning that but it's all connected to a spin, to a rhythm that is very natural. And nature is our best teacher. We shouldn't force ourselves to not have these cycles. Like some people say, I want it to be summer all year round. That's a nice aspiration, but it doesn't work that way. So you'll say, what about those countries, those cities in the world that are summer all the time? Well, ask people who live in Hawaii or in California and other places. It's beautiful, but some of them will tell you it's plastic. It never changes. It's always, and it's not consistent with the cycles of life of a human being. So even though it's beautiful to live there, but there's something about it that's not completely, we are not that stable. We do go through changes. So there's great places to vacation, and I'm not telling anyone not to live in California, and I'm not in any way here to criticize Californians. I have family that live there and they're perfectly happy. I'm just pointing out that there's that element that could create an illusion that everything is like, summer the whole time, but not everything is summer the whole time. There are winters, and there are springs, and there are autumns and falls, and so on. So you look at nature, you look at a person's cycle, and you learn from that how the spin works. But it's all going to come down to the material of our lives, the body of our lives, the soul of our lives, the intelligence of our lives. Those three souls I mentioned. And then comes that fourth that creates the full balance, where you have a fully balanced life. Now, don't expect that you can just straighten everything out overnight. Well, the goal of this discussion is to lay out the tools that we have. And you'll discover when you start looking into it that we have different challenges. Some people have deep challenges with their balanced materialism. Some people have very deep challenges with their spirituality. There's some people extremely successful materially, but their soul is parched and hungry and thirsty. There are people who are very spiritually rich, but their material lives are compromised or challenging. So, and then there's stages we go through in life when things are reversed. The Zohar has a fascinating statement. It says, the strength of the soul is the weakness of the body. And the strength of the body is the weakness of the soul. If a person is too materialistic, generally speaking, their soul will be compromised. Because they're so involved in their own needs. You see people riding high, they usually often lose sensitivity, to be honest. There are people who don't, who maintain it, and that's the effort, but it's easy to do that. Then there's the other way around. People who, when become materialistic, not so successful, often that opens them up to hearing something soulful, because it's not working. So it's interesting how these things work. That's why it's so vital to have this balance, this spin. Of course, spin itself also has a downside. We all know about media spin, that every time someone says something, you have the media people coming to tell you what you should be thinking. So obviously, I'm not talking about that spin at all. So Dreidel has an interesting meaning in Yiddish. Dreidel, the drei. There's people called drei a cup. They drei a cup, which means they make you crazy. They're excellent at spinning circles around you. You have people that you talk to them, and they leave you spinning because you don't know what they're talking about, but they just know how to manipulate your mind. That's not what we're discussing here. A dreidel here we're talking about is a dreidel sometimes it says almost dismissively in Yiddish, you're a drei cup, or you're a dreidel, you're dreidling me, you're like spinning me, you're just playing around with me. You're like what's the word, mind games or something like that. But here obviously we're talking about the spin of life, which is the cycle. And it's interesting when you look at not just on the microcosm, which is our personal lives, we have in the cosmos, everything is spinning. You're talking about orbits, revolutions, and the orbits of the planets, the orbits of the sun, the moon, the earth, and so on. And of course, within our own selves, we know that today subatomic particles are spinning, whether it's electron spinning or it's subatomic particles that are constantly on the move, they're dynamic. So wherever we turn, there's real movement, even if you don't see it. When you go to the ocean, I've spent nights at the ocean, tremendous. You think the ocean's going to go to sleep at some point. It never goes to sleep. It's relentless. But it's exactly that, the two, tension and resolution. The waves come crashing in, then it gets quiet. And then just another wave. Literally like the cycle. So this is the balance of life. This is how the spin works. And we know the waves actually are created by the gravitational pull of the moon. The tides are affected by it. So this is, when you learn life, is not what people think it is. People want their lives to be pieces. Here, here, here. Life is a running film. It's always moving. And it's a film, frame by frame, that continues to move. We like to freeze frames. We, for some reason, want to freeze frame. We want something right now and keep it there. It doesn't work that way. If you saw yourself as constantly a movement, you have a very different and much healthier perspective on life, because then you're open to knowing you're fluid. What I see many people doing is fighting the movement of life. They're almost fighting. It's like, your heart is beating, to fight that beat and say, let me just quiet everything down. You don't want to quiet everything down. You want to go with that flow. You want to go by the rhythm. And that's a critical component to life, going with the flow. Not many people talk about it, but not many people know how to go with the flow. When things don't go their way, they start kicking and screaming. They don't go with the flow. When things are going their way, they may take it for granted. Going with the flow is very interesting. It means you need to get yourself out of the way. Because if you're, let's say, in a stormy ocean, and you're not going to go with the flow, you're going to either drain your resources and not able to swim, or you're going to drown. So what means go with the flow? You let the waves carry you. And sometimes the forward thrust, so you push forward. But if you see the other way going, the best thing to do is just float. Let yourself float. Tread water. And so many people are resisting. And I don't mean just in water. We're talking about now psychologically. Sometimes when things are difficult, the plan then is don't fight it. Let yourself flow through it. Now, obviously, case by case, we have to know what it means exactly. But bottom line is, sometimes it's best when you're a weaker state and you see resistance is very strong, it may be best not to fight it and save your resources and gather up your strength for the time when you will have the strength to move it forward. I remember years ago, where was it? One of the, maybe it was maybe at one of the shuls, when I was giving the class in another location. So we had seltzer bottles on the table.
And somebody was thirsty, and they opened it up. As we all know, what happens if you don't open it right? The whole seltzer ended up on him instead of in any cup, because it went flying. It was like, I guess someone shook it up, or it was warm. I don't know what it was. Anyway, so I decided to change the topic of my class to the art. The art of opening up a seltzer bottle and the lessons in life it provides us. And what was the art? As I said like this, the key is this, that when you have a seltzer bottle, instead of just twisting it open, turn 2 revolutions to open it and 1 twist back. 2 spins forward, 1 spin back. That way, slowly, the pressure will be released. So the key thing is not 1 spin forward and 1 spin back, because then you'll never get the bottle open. You'll just be going back to the drawing board. But 2 spins forward, 1 spin back, so you're always 1 spin ahead. So in life, the same thing is in life. There are times we will have setbacks, inevitably. There are times that things are not going to work. And then there are times we're going to feel very positive and have opportunities. The key is like this, to know that when you're going back, fine, go back a step. But when you're going forward, make sure you always go twice as much. So you're always ahead of the game. I find people either they try to fight the setback, and that doesn't work, or they try to go so many steps ahead and get ahead, and then they also weaken themselves because they went too fast. So the key is to find that balance between the forward and the, which we call Rotzinger and Shuv, tension and resolution, the yearning and the return, which goes back to the whole spin of life and the Dreidel of life and the Chanukah of life. So that said, you have here for ourselves a tremendous lesson, a lesson that goes deep into the guts of what we're made of, our body, soul, our intelligence, and the whole picture. And that ends up being the steps that are necessary to really be able to grow. So in the context of, to put it in a more so-called mystical context, so I mentioned body, soul is similar to the wick and the flame. The soul is like the flame that rises, and the body is like the wick. And that creates a tension, because the body wants to be grounded and wants self-gratification, wants to survive. The soul aspires to transcend. So what do you do with these 2 forces? Comes the intelligence and says, fine, I'll find a way to referee and balance them. But the key thing we come to learn is that there's a 4th dimension, and that is that God is not closer to the soul than he is to the body. In many spiritual systems, they feel, okay, the body is needed, but ultimately your goal is spiritual growth. The truth is both spirit and body are both divine creations. And therefore, when you, in a healthy way, feed your body, you're doing the same as when you feed your soul. So really, you're not looking for soul versus body, you're looking for something that's a 3rd dimension called the divine, the holiness, a sanctity that sanctifies, that is able to therefore spiritualize the material. That you hear very little about. We hear about spirituality, we hear about materialism, but spiritualizing the material is the greatest art of them all. Because then you're not just finding a way to compartmentalize or balance, you're actually creating total harmony. And a perfect example is go back to the flame. What happens when a healthy wick is burning and giving off the Chanukah candle flame? So if you look at a wick, wicks are conducive to flames. For example, if you would try to use a piece of metal to be a wick, it won't work. Metal is not combustible. It's not flammable, I should say. There are pieces of wood. Wet wood is also not really the best. A wick is a very unique container that is a piece of matter, but it's refined enough to allow the oil to be absorbed in the wick and create a very nice and clean flame. So it's a perfect example of how soul meets body. Because you can have a situation where, let's say, you have a very tough piece of wood, very wet, full of stuff, very coarse, and try to light a fire, it's going to crackle and make noise and may not even burn. Then you have a very dry piece of wood that's really very tinder dry. That becomes very conducive. So the key to integrating our materialism and spirituality is to make our materialism more refined,
So it can become a wick through which the flame of your soul can burn. So there's basically really 4 different types of imbalances. You could have the flame is too strong for the wick. You could have the wick is too strong for the flame. You could have both of them are too strong for each other, and you could have both of them are too weak for each other. What would be weak? For example, if you just have a thread, it'll burn, but it won't be a wick. It'll burn out so quickly because there was nothing, no matter. So you need to have enough matter, but not too much matter. You need to have enough soul, but not too much soul. So you need the perfect amount of flame and the perfect amount of wick. This is what the Kabbalists call what's the word I want to use? The perfect blend that allows things to mix together. And this is really a secret to all of life. How do you blend things together without one dominating over the other? The right mixture. The right mixture. So here you'd have to have is that you have, that's why in the Torah it says you need to have a healthy body. You need to be a healthy person. If you're not a healthy person, you cannot serve God well. You cannot be a spiritual person because your body's going to get in the way all the time. Illness, disease, fatigue, weakness. So you need to have a healthy body that's a healthy wick. Now, the body has to then become trained to be refined enough to now contain and be a wick, a fuel for the flame. What does that mean? For example, if you sit down to eat, great. So you're eating, you're getting the body strong. But let's say you start eating and indulging and eating more than you should eat and eating things you shouldn't be eating. Then suddenly eating becomes an end in itself. Teaches us, Chanukah, you eat a meal before you sit down, recognize the table is an altar. The meal is an offering. Make a blessing before you eat the meal, the food. You make sure it's the right type of food. So you're creating a situation, it's food that you can digest, both physically and spiritually, and the food becomes fuel that when it becomes your flesh and blood, and the fuel, you'll use that strength to build, to be constructive, to help somebody. The opposite would be you use the strength that you gain to be selfish and hurtful to others. So there you have how materialism becomes fuel for spiritual growth. If the materialism becomes an end in itself, then the wick is too strong and doesn't allow the flame to really catch. The other extreme would be where a person is not even giving any value, any time to their bodies. They're not exercising, they're not dieting properly, they're not eating the proper things. So you may be very spiritual, but there's a very flimsy body to hold on to, so the container is going to be weak. That would be like that thread that just burns out so quickly. So there the soul is too strong for the body. And then there's the other two scenarios, that they're both very intense. Then of course they clash. And then they're both very weak. The key is to have that one is that they're both tamed. The soul is not too strong, the body is not too strong. And they're both conducive to fit toward each other. They meet each other. So if you try to take a massive torch and try to light a Chanukah flame with it, it's just going to burn out the whole thing so quickly, it won't work. If you can take a massive wick and let a little flame, it will burn out as well. It won't work. You need to have the perfect balance between matter and spirit. And that's the Chanukah balance. That's the secret. That goes back to the spin, goes back to the body, soul, intelligence. Because the intelligence, as I said, is the arbiter, is the referee that looks at everything and says, okay, here's what we need today. And you see this many times. You'll see people, there's situations where students, let's say, came to the Rebbe, came to a spiritual master and said, I'm studying, I'm praying. And he says, no, you're doing it too much, you need more rest. You need to get yourself a little healthy because you're going to burn out. Too much prayer and study. Sometimes the other way around. Someone's indulgent too much in their material lives, busy shopping all day. You need much more time studying and praying and being more spiritual. So that balance is the key to everything. Each one of us is in a different situation, and we have to make those lists I mentioned before. But when you do, you'll discover where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, where you can supplement, what you need to supplement to build a whole, healthy, full individual, a spinning dreidel that spins properly, not too fast, not too slow, but is always on the move, but never in an overwhelming fashion. So I want to wish everybody a very happy and freilich, and happy and freilich. Freilich means happy. a very happy and illuminating Chanukah. As I said before, light, when balanced, will both warm and illuminate. Think of light that overwhelms a wick, then it'll just burn everything up. That's not what you want. You don't want it to be so bright and so hot that you can't exist. On the other hand, if the wick is too strong, it'll be too dark and too cold. So we need the perfect balance, like the sun. If it was too close to the earth, it would burn up the earth. If it was too far, it would freeze. We need to have the perfect balance of that flame and wick to both also illuminate and warm each other. So may you all be walking menorahs and walking flames and walking dreidels, where you learn to spin properly and illuminate and warm your environments, not burn it up, not deprive it, not illuminate, but not overwhelm. And when you do that, you really become a force. Like I said before, one flame lights another flame, ad infinitum, without the original flame ever being diminished. Again, a phenomenon only in flames. Everything else, if I give you something, it may be a great thing, but I'm going to have less. If I give you food, if I give you money. Whereas flame, you can light another flame, and the original flame is not diminished. Not only that, the original flame gets empowered, because when flames come together, what happens? They get stronger. You ever see when a flame gets close to another flame? They literally absorb each other. They both come into one. It's a fascinating thing to see. That's what love does. Two things, two entities. You ever see flames? You put them close. At some point, they start being drawn to each other. You don't see that anywhere. You put two pieces of wood together. Wood won't do that. A magnet will do that. But magnets don't really get absorbed. They just attract each other. So may we all be such attracting forces, agents of light, and agents of warmth, and agents of spin, of movement. And anyone coming around us feels that warmth and illumination and dynamic energy, the vitality. That's what I was looking for. Warmth, illumination, and vitality. Happy Chanukah, everyone. This class now will continue every Wednesday, both online, Facebook, YouTube. Like us, share. What else do you do on these social media? Comment, and please stay in touch in every possible way. Let us all be flames that join together and create this massive flame that doesn't destroy but transforms the world into a world of light. Thank you.